Hey everybody, Phil here. We are going with the classic format today. My producer Thomas is going to throw me a suggestion of a top 5 on the fly. I'm going to come up with the best answers that I can, and I hope you find them helpful. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, top 5 tournament struggles and how to fix them. This is a good one, but a tough one for me. So when somebody says, I can usually survive a long time in a tournament, but I'm never making final tables, I'm never building a huge chip stack, or if I do build a huge chip stack, it just kind of dwindles. What am I doing wrong? The long run in tournaments takes a very long time. So you have to keep in mind that even if you are experiencing these types of results, you don't put too much weight into this because you might be doing everything right. I mean, nobody's doing everything right, but you might be. This might not be you, but if this statement resonates with you, if it rings true for your experience, usually what causes that over the long term is that you are playing too tight, specifically not gambling enough in the later stages of the tournament. So much about bubble play and short stack play in general is about aggression and putting all of your chips in, especially being the one to go all in, but sometimes calling it off with hands that you are kind of afraid to call it off with. That's where a lot of the money is won. And you have to keep in mind that, everything that you feel emotionally in a tournament. So let's say you're on the bubble and you just really want to make the money and you're afraid that if you go all in, you're going to get called and you're going to bust out. You're afraid that someone's shoving a range that, you might be ahead of, but you can't really call it off because then, the bubble is looming and maybe you're not ahead of the range, but maybe if you're ahead of their hand, they'll still suck out. All of those things that you're feeling, other people are feeling as well. Everybody's human so far. The way to capitalize on that fear, those emotions, are to be the one putting people in uncomfortable spots. You should be the one attacking blinds. You should be the one 3-bet jamming against somebody who's opening too wide. And I think a lot of this can be solved by looking at charts of how you should play with 8 big blinds, 10 big blinds, 15 big blinds, 20 big blinds. Sometimes it will surprise you how much you should be sticking your money in, both as the caller and as the raiser. Poker is a very different game when played at 15 big blinds than at 100 big blinds. You can't kind of wait for the same stranglehold on a hand to put your money in with. You need to just get your money in and hope for the best. And oftentimes when you have 10 big blinds, stealing the 2.5 big blinds in the pot with the big blind and the small blind and the ante, that's 25% increase to your stack. And the most you can lose of your stack is 100%. So if you're making that 25% increase and then somebody calls, you're always gonna have equity when they call. Minimum 20%, often 40%, 50%. And so then you're even with that 2.5 big blind overlay, you might be making money with your 45% equity. If you fall into this category, look at some of the ways that you should play in theory, push yourself to play more aggressively, probably even more aggressively than you should in theory. A problem that I sometimes see, somebody will say, I seem to always get off to a good start, but by the end of day 1 or into day 2, I never make something happen, or I find myself in so many tough spots, or I get confused often. This could be a couple of things, but one thing I want to draw your attention to is energy management. So tournaments, especially live tournaments, are grueling. A 12, 14-hour day, you'll sleep for 6 hours, then you'll play another 12, 14-hour day. It's so important to manage your energy levels and your expectations for yourself. You're not going to be at your best 12 hours in, neither are your opponents. There are things you can do to improve your focus levels and energy levels. I would say, avoid over caffeinating early, especially because early in a tournament, blinds are so small compared to what they are later in the tournament. You're actually playing for much smaller stakes than you will be later. So by over caffeinating at the beginning of the day, you're gonna have that crash in the later half of the day when you're playing higher stakes. And you can either recaffeinate and hope for the best and then probably disturb your sleep, or you can not and you can just be crashed. Similarly, day 2s, day 3s, and you're feeling unfocused and you're really beaten down. First of all, it's kind of normal, but second of all, you need to be prioritizing sleep. There's no substitute for sleep and what it does for you. Anything that you can do in order to, when the tournament day is done, wind down, get back to wherever you can sleep faster. There's a lot of value in staying closer to the venue because of that time saved in the commute, getting you back and getting you into your evening routine and winding down. And that's another aspect. Winding down from the session is really important. When you're playing all day, you have so much, your mind is racing, you have so much adrenaline every time you enter kind of a big pot that you'll leave, you'll be amped up, and you'll continue to have thoughts, if you're anything like me, replaying through your mind. Elliot Rowe has some MP3s for post-session kind of meditations, but general meditation of any kind, taking a walk while listening to some music, anything that would help you unwind. Going right from that to, all right, I'm going to sleep now, or all right, I'm going to go hang out with my family for a little bit and then go to sleep. Having something in between to kind of turn your brain off, kind of start the relaxation process is really helpful. So another problem people have is not being aware enough of the structure and what that means for your game and your time management. You start with a certain number of big blinds, the blinds increase at this rate. You can kind of have a rough idea of when the bubble might burst. This is relevant in a few ways. First of all, some levels, the antes are a bigger portion of the blinds, and some they're smaller. And I actually like to vary my play. So when the antes are a smaller portion of the big blind, I will play extra tight, even more than the antes kind of dictate, because I want to build an image for the next level where antes are going to be big and I'm going to be playing a lot more aggressively trying to steal those antes. But anyways, just being aware of the structure from a strategic perspective is helpful. Now also, if you have a tournament that's starting, 200 big blinds deep, 4 hours in is 75 big blinds deep, it's a great opportunity if they have late registration to just wait and register late. This is debatable, certainly, and if you have a big edge and people are in there early punting off their stacks, then okay. But if you're playing a grueling schedule day in, day out, like at the World Series of Poker, getting that extra 2 hours of sleep, getting that rest even of some kind that's not sleep is really powerful. Is going to add up over time, or rather the opposite effects, the lack of sleep is going to compound over time. And if you're playing for a month straight or a month and a half, like the World Series of Poker, managing your sleep and energy in the early days by skipping some levels that are, relatively unimportant, I think is really valuable. I see a lot of players struggle with mentally resetting and adapting to new circumstances. So what I mean by that is sometimes you're playing at a table, you're, kind of deep in the tournament and you're the chip leader at the table. So you have your foot on the gas, you're running people over, and then you lose a big pot. And now all of a sudden you're, average stack at the table. A lot of people, first of all, they just have been playing that way for a little while. So the routine kind of just continues. They keep opening the same number of hands as they were before when they shouldn't be. And then other people are just thinking about getting back to that stack because they want to be back to the stack that they were. There's so much of that in poker tournaments, getting back to your peak stack. And that's really detrimental to your thought process. Resetting and moving on to the new conditions that you find yourself in is really valuable, because putting out of your mind where you were, looking at where you are now, the makeup of your table, and then what strategy should look like with your new stack, and this player now having a big stack on your left and this player on your right being relatively tight, all those things, they change when your stack size change, and your stack size can change in an individual hand in a matter of seconds. So be ready and willing to adapt. Similarly, even if your stack stays the same, somebody else's stack might double and they now cover you, and they're a really loose aggressive player, and that should totally change the way that you play from there on out. Or somebody gets moved away from your table, somebody gets moved to your table, you now have a completely different dynamic to keep in mind. Tournaments are really, really dynamic in the way that you need to adjust to the number of big blinds that everybody else at the table has, the payout structure as you get closer to the money, or you're in the money and closer to the final table. There are so many elements that you need to keep in mind. And so being ready at all times to make those adjustments, to consciously think about those adjustments, not just be like, oh, I know it's getting closer to the money, so I should be a little tighter. Just think through, okay, where are we at right now? What does that mean for me? What is my strategy going to be for this period of the tournament? And then if 2 hands later you lose a big pot, do it again. All right, we're still at this point in the tournament, but now my stack is this. What should my strategy be now for this point in the tournament? Not commonly occurring problem, but an expensive problem that people have in tournaments is when they get to a final table and it starts to get down to 5-handed, 4-handed, 3-handed, heads up, they get run over. Because the majority, if you play tournaments every day, the majority of the time you're going to be playing at a full table. At all points up until the final table, you play at a full table. That's the overwhelming majority of a tournament. And then even once you get to the final table, it starts as a full table. But playing shorthanded is a bit different. Honestly, playing shorthanded does not require a different skill set. It's just that a skill set that is too weak is going to get exposed in a short-handed lineup. Let's say everybody folds to you on the button. You're playing three-handed now. You're on the button, there's just a small blind and the big blind, and you're playing three-handed. Everybody else is out of the pot. So strategy there on the button is really similar to strategy playing three-handed on the button. The problem is some people who are too tight, too passive, when they're at a full table, they can capitalize on other players' looseness and win more pots than they should against weaker hands. But then they don't play well when it's folded to them on the button. They don't play well when it's folded to them and cut off. They don't play well when the button opens and they're in the big blind. But that gets made up for by the other pots that they play, and generally, of course, with lower blind levels and deeper stacks. At a four-handed table, if you're too tight and passive, it's going to be exposed. And certainly when your head's up, it's going to be exposed. So work on your short-handed play, I would say, by getting practice maybe in cash games, getting practice in sit and goes. Sit and goes are a great way to start to basically simulate a final table. If you start a six-handed sit and go or a nine-handed sit and go, if they even have those anymore, and just go from 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2, and stacks just like in tournaments, blinds just like in tournaments. That will help you really improve your final table play. And what you may not realize is that by improving your final table play, improving your three-handed and four-handed play, you're actually improving your full ring play, because you're improving the way that you play from the cutoff, from the button, against the cutoff and the button, against the small blind from the big blind. That's an area that I think a lot of people assume only helps them once they make the final table, which is important, but it doesn't happen that often. But no, it helps you throughout the whole tournament. So work on your short-handed play, and it will just strengthen your poker game all around. Whether you're going to play the World Series of Poker or any other tournament, remember, at the end of the day, tournaments are supposed to be fun. Poker's supposed to be fun, but especially tournaments. They're a really fun and exciting format. They also can bring with them a lot of emotions, just like any poker, but tournaments especially, the stakes are literally raised as you go through the tournament. They can be more stressful than cash games. They can be more tense and intense than cash games. And so by going into it, having no real expectations, you know that your goal is to play the best you can, and your goal is to have fun. And if you're attempting to just do those two things, and you know that the results will be what the results will be, because in any individual tournament, they're out of your hands, you'll set yourself up for more success, not only emotionally and personally, but financially as well. I think you'll have better results if you go in with those expectations. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. I'd love to hear what you'd like to see more of from me. I make these videos with a specific type of viewer in mind quite often, and it's really helpful for me to actually hear from a specific viewer with a specific problem or a specific interest, so that I can speak to it and it's resonating with somebody out there. I very much hope you enjoyed. I look forward to seeing you in the comments and seeing you next week. Until then, take care and good luck.